Last week, as we began this series, I reminisced about my 8th grade English class and our teacher's intent that we answer the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I stated that it was a Herculean task for an 8th grader, not only because there were 4,000 to 5,000 careers from which to choose, but also because an 8th grader did not know enough about himself or his world to even begin to make an adequate choice. And maybe even more importantly, those career cards simply could not inspire a real dream. They couldn't tell us of the glory that might be a part of what we do. And that's really where we left Solomon last week. He's desperately searching for man's purpose in life. He wants to know what man might expect to gain for all the fuss and aggravation he has to face on this earth. Solomon wants to know what dreams man might hope to fulfill in the here and now. Unfortunately, like those 8th graders, Solomon needs some real inspiration to realize his dreams. Now, for me, the foundation for those answers was laid the very next year in school. When I arrived as a freshman in high school, our class was given the fundamental tools with which to construct our dreams. And those tools came in the form of an aptitude test. There was an English test, a math test, probably a science test. There was a personality test. But the one unit that I really remember was the dexterity test. In the dexterity test, all the class went in and we were standing in a single room in front of a table. And in front of each person on the table, there were 3 things. There was a board with holes in it. There was a pile of brass rivets. Each rivet, of course, would fit into a hole. There was a pile of brass washers, which would go on the rivets, which would then go in the hole. Now, when the word was given, each student was to begin by picking up a rivet, fit the appropriate number of washers over it, and put the assembly into the hole on the board. At the end of the allotted time, the number of rivets and washers successfully combined were counted. We redid the test several times. We did it without washers. We did it with 1 washer per rivet. And we did it with 2 washers per rivet. I can't tell you how many correctly assembled rivet and washer combinations were needed to illustrate the possession of good dexterity. But I do remember that later, when the results of our test came to the school and we discussed it, I was told to avoid the career of being a surgeon. I simply did not possess the dexterity for such a career. And while I was disappointed to find that I did not measure up, I did feel a surge of hope in the career choices presented. Knowing my strengths, weaknesses, and interests triggered at least the glimpse of a dream. Knowing where I might go and where my dreams might carry me was something. Over the course of the next several chapters of Ecclesiastes, Solomon is going to give himself a kind of aptitude test. He's going to make several experiments in order to determine his strengths and abilities. In those experiments, he's going to fully investigate the realm of man's existence in the hope of living the dream. And he's going to try to answer the tough question, where can my dreams take me? Ecclesiastes chapter 1. Beginning in the 12th verse. I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem, and I set my mind to seek and explore by wisdom concerning all that has been done under heaven. It is a grievous task which God has given to the sons of men to be afflicted with. I have seen all the works which have been done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and striving after wind. And so, as our aptitude test pointed out, to have dreams, we must know something of life. You know, as I began to write that point, I really considered just making that point. We must know something. And for an 8th grader, that may have been a fair statement. That may have been adequate. But for most of us, the reality is that we already know some things. Most of us have at least some idea of how this life works. Most of us possess the rudimentary courtesy to deal with other people. Most of us understand the need to balance work and family. And most of us know the distinction between work and play. We know the difference between toil and recreation. And while those are all well beyond an 8th grade understanding, as adults, most of us have gained at least that essential understanding of how to get along in this world. That understanding becomes the foundation on which our dreams will be built. So to know something of life, we must explore it fully. It's never enough to base our dreams on the briefest of understandings. If we're going to really dream the dream, we have to consider the whole of the reality. Many dream of fame, never realizing that there will also be a marked loss in privacy. Many dream of making an important discovery, never realizing that may mean years of isolation, whether in the field or in the laboratory. Many dream of the power to govern, never realizing that first means governing oneself. And so too, our exploration of life is a double-edged sword. We must go to its roots. When Solomon records that he sets his mind to seek wisdom, the word means that he wishes to get to it at its very base level. He wants to resort to wisdom. It becomes the crutch upon which he leans as an essential tool to realize his dream. He sees wisdom as the guiding light necessary to move ahead, and accordingly, he wishes to probe it to its very depths. And we should all readily understand that concept. That's why we are first taught to add before we're taught to multiply, use trigonometric functions, or analyze statistical data. It's why our first book is typically See, Spot, Run, and not War and Peace. It's why our first job is flipping burgers at McDonald's and not governing the fusion chamber of a nuclear power plant. On this earth, we need to grasp the basics before we even begin to reach for the stars. And Solomon is going to get those basics down hard and cold in his life so that when he reaches, he'll be able to do so fully. But the other side of that double-edged sword is we must understand the forest for the trees. To explore wisdom, Solomon is looking for a more comprehensive approach. He wants to get beyond those grassroots and make the leap to the application of wisdom in all facets of life. In his commentary on Ecclesiastes, H.C. Leupold records, search means to investigate the roots of a matter, to explore the subject on all sides. And we picture that when we see a tree. When you look at a beautiful tree, and let's just say, for example, it's an oak tree, and you go out there and you see, man, that's a beautiful oak tree. It's got foliage, it's got beautiful acorns every spring. It's a wonderful, wonderful tree. And so you want to find out about the tree, and you get down to its root ball, and you look and you see the root ball, and you see all those root hairs, and you see the soil, and you see the moisture, and you see how they're drawn up into the tree, and you see how the tree supports itself because it's well rooted. But to really get to know the tree, you have to walk around the whole of the tree and gaze upon it from all sides. And Solomon is taking a totally different tack than that which most men take. He wants to learn not only the root reality of wisdom, but also what that wisdom means in the rest of his life. And so he sets his mind to that twofold purpose. But far too many are satisfied with the basics, whether in their lives or on this planet or in their relationship with God. Fortunately, Solomon has the wisdom to stretch beyond the basics. And so, to have dreams, we must understand the cost. Just as it's never enough to base our dreams on the briefest of understandings, it is not enough to dream without understanding what such dreams may cost. Years of being a professional athlete may mean years of aches and pains, even after we retire. Years of 70-hour work weeks may leave us worn out. Years spent simply getting by in a dead-end job may leave us frustrated, depressed, miserable. Years traveling may leave us without a permanent home. But many accept those costs as things necessary to live the dream. And Solomon makes it clear that the pursuit of wisdom is that kind of a dream. And while it's a God-given impulse, it has a cost. And it's a desperate cost. In fact, it goes beyond desperation. Solomon literally writes, it is an evil task. Of course, he does not intend that we remain in our ignorance. He means that it is nearly impossible to fully understand anything at any time. Even in the 21st century, with all their expertise, doctors still understand very little about the actual workings of the human body. With all the self-help books in the world, man has still not come to even understand himself. And with all his technological advancements, man has still not been able to prevent disease, poverty, or death. And sadly, physical health, mental health, and poverty all seem to be things well within the scope of man, and yet they have not been answered. Beyond those are even greater questions. Man has not yet found a means to fully probe the ocean depths, to understand the marvels of volcanoes, or to conquer the vastness of space. And it was just as true 30 centuries ago in the life of Solomon. Even with his vast collection of proverbs and colloquial wisdom, Solomon's heart still had unanswered questions. And it may be difficult for us to understand why Solomon says that all our questioning and all our seeking of wisdom might be considered an evil task until we realize the truth. There is simply no end to man's questioning. Man questions everything about everything at every moment of every day. It's an evil task because man finds himself searching for his dream in all the wrong places. Solomon reminds us that he is looking under the sun. He is limiting his scope to the scope of this earth. And in such a scope, man is forced to look for meaning in a fallen creation. But ultimately, nothing but frustration is to be found. For the mark of sin weighs heavily on both man and creation, and nothing man can learn or do will ever make the change necessary for him to truly live the dream. So Solomon's conclusion in verse 18 should come as no surprise. In much wisdom there is much grief, and increasing knowledge results in increasing pain. You know, that's why I get such a kick out of the experts who draw various conclusions and espouse them as fact. Because the sad truth is, the more we learn, the more we become aware of how much we really do not know. One night, years ago when I was in college, I was going into my Ecclesiastes class, and I just happened to meet the professor at the door. And he asked me if I was ready for the test that night, and I had to look at him and honestly say, I don't know. It seems like the more I study, the less I really know. And the professor patted me on the shoulder and said, that's the beginning of an education. It's the beginning. To find out just how little you really know or can expect. Now don't get me wrong. That was one class in which I can proudly say I received an A+, but I can at least relate to Solomon's frustration on a limited level. There is always more to know. On this earth, we will always find more questions than answers. But for Solomon and for us, the dream is more than knowing a little something. To dream is to want the good life. After all, that's the real thrust of our dreams, to give us the kind of life which is truly pleasurable, the kind of life other men can only dream about. All men want to feel like they're of value. All men want to feel like they're accomplishing something. All men want to be above where they are. All men want just a little more than they currently have. But to achieve the dream is something more. And even Solomon was no different. Chapter 2, verse 1. I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure. So, enjoy yourself. And behold, it too was futility. Solomon's experiment with wisdom was a success in the sense that Solomon gained great wisdom of how this earth in general and how man specifically operates. But it was a failure in that it did not give him the answers to life's tough questions. And now Solomon takes up a second experiment to live the dream. But before we go on, we need to note Solomon is not simply being hedonistic. He simply desires, as any man would desire, to gain the pleasures his wisdom, his knowledge, and his skill have now made possible. He wants to feel alive, so he stimulates his senses. Enjoyment is about what we see, taste, hear, feel, and smell. And Solomon wants to bask in the good life his wisdom now affords. Solomon then gives us a list of those things which make up the good life. The good life is a life of camaraderie. Verse 2. I said of laughter, it is madness, and of pleasure, what does it accomplish? Even in our 21st century lives, camaraderie is almost essential. When we're at ease with friends, we tend to laugh, to regale each other with joyous, robust tales, and to enjoy the time spent together. And so the madness Solomon refers to is not mental instability, but boastfulness and the foolish, ridiculous, inane dialogue that is so common with such gatherings. Because undoubtedly, such gatherings are one of the reasons God felt man should not be alone. There is a need to share with friends. There is a need to recount and relive triumphs, or just to relax and perhaps be a little silly on occasion. But Solomon realizes that such gatherings do not contribute to our society, to the furtherance of men, or even necessarily to our own self-worth. Camaraderie fails to give a permanent answer to our dreams. Because while camaraderie can lighten the heart, even the best of such times are short-lived. Very quickly we need to resume our duties, take up our responsibilities, and put on the more somber spirit of our daily sojourn. And while camaraderie may be joyous, and it is certainly better than loneliness, simply having friends with which to share will never satisfy our heart's desire. But camaraderie is only one part of the good life. The good life is a life filled with delicacies. Verse 3, I experimented with my mind how to stimulate my body with wine while my mind was guiding me wisely, and how to take hold of folly until I could see what good there is for the sons of men to do under heaven the few years of their lives. Now we need to know, first of all, that this does not mean that Solomon is grabbing himself a bottle of Ripple and laying stone cold drunk in the middle of an alley. In this case, wine is representative of all the delicacies which may be found at the table. And so the folly Solomon found was that there was simply the joy of being sated with all the good things which might come his way. 25 years ago, we went to the French Chef's restaurant at Disney World's Epcot Center. And we had escargot. We'd always heard about it. We had no idea how good it was, but you've always heard it's a delicacy. It's something you really want to have. And so since we were on vacation, we're going to splurge. We're going to treat ourselves to escargot. I'm going to tell you, from my viewpoint, it ain't all it's cracked up to be. Okay? Afterwards, Linda even made the comment, it just goes to show, if you broil it with butter and garlic, the French will eat anything. And that is Solomon's reaction to the delicacies of his table. They may be tasty, they may be special, they may require real expertise in the kitchen, but when it comes down to it, it's just snails with garlic and butter. A peanut butter and jelly sandwich would be just as nourishing and probably just as satisfying. Solomon gives us an important lesson. The delicacies of this life are special, but only because they are not common, not because they're more fulfilling. And then, too, the good life is a life filled with accomplishment. And after the delicacies of this life, which this life may offer, this is probably what most of us attribute to the good life. The ability to get things done, to achieve, to succeed, to attain what others have not. Verse 4, I enlarged my works. I built houses for myself. I planted vineyards for myself. I made gardens and parks for myself. And I planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made ponds of water for myself from which to irrigate a forest of growing trees. Solomon enlarged his works because Solomon truly knows accomplishment. He has achieved what none have achieved before. He's built a grand abode. In 1 Kings we learn Solomon spent 13 years in the construction of his palace in Jerusalem. But he also built a little getaway up in the forest of Lebanon. Just a little getaway. One of the halls in the forest getaway was 75 feet by 45 feet. Just a little tiny shack. The kind of place you would only take a couple of friends on a hunting weekend. He built a similar house for the daughter of Pharaoh, whom he married. The foundation stones of those homes were 12 and 15 feet thick, and the houses were lined with cedar. None of that even considers the story storage cities he built throughout the kingdom, but it should be sufficient cause for us to share in the marvel of another. In 1 Kings we read, when the queen of Sheba perceived all the wisdom of Solomon, the house that he built, the food of his table, the seating of his servants, the attendance of his waiters and their attire, his cupbearers and his stairway by which he went up to the house of the Lord, there was no more spirit in her. Solomon has achieved on such a grandiose level that even the queen of Sheba is absolutely stunned beyond words. So even from those verses, we should not be surprised Solomon invested in his table. Solomon undoubtedly inherited vineyards from David. In 1 Chronicles, we learn David had a servant in charge of his vineyards, and David had a servant in charge of the wine cellars. And so Solomon would have inherited such things. But we also learn in Song of Solomon that Solomon had a very special vineyard that was all his own. A very special place that was just his. But Solomon's investment was more extensive than his abode and his table. Solomon planted for his retreat. You know, it's almost unimaginable that Solomon found the need to retreat away from his stately palace. Our 26th president, Teddy Roosevelt, gets credit for the creation of our national park system, but it was not a new or even novel idea. 30 centuries earlier, Solomon invested heavily in similar areas in which he could retreat. He built gardens, parks, and ponds. And it's not hard to imagine the king relaxing in a walk through the soothing shade and the aromatic air of his private retreat when the pressures of the throne mounted. Or maybe it was just when he needed a break from those 700 wives. But the accomplished king is far from done. He invested in his servants. A moment ago we glossed over David's servants, but Solomon's servants would have been a veritable army. Verse 7, I bought male and female servants. I had born servants. Also, I possessed flocks and herds larger than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. Solomon's 40,000 stalls would have required thousands of servants just to maintain his horses. His extensive holdings would have required thousands more. The servants necessary to adequately tend to his harem of 1,000 women would have necessitated even more. And those numbers do not include the servants who waited table, prepared his food, maintained order in his various homes, or personally answered the call of the king. Solomon invested heavily in the people around him. Also, Solomon saved against a rainy day. I collected for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and provinces. I provided for myself male and female singers and the pleasures of men. Now, there can be no doubt that Solomon achieved what many would consider the good life, but we need to note the absence of his greatest achievement in this list. Solomon's greatest achievement was the temple in which the presence of the Lord hovered over the Ark of the Covenant. But that particular achievement goes beyond the realm of this lesson. Solomon mentions only those things which were constructed for the creature comforts of the king. And sadly, his conclusion about achievement is the same as his conclusion about wisdom. All the bounty of this earth cannot fully satisfy the human heart. Verse 11. Thus I considered all my activities which my hands had done, and the labor which I had exerted, and behold, all was vanity and striving after wind, and there was no profit under the sun. Even the good life, if this life is all there is no good. And it's no good because there is one inescapable problem. To live our dreams, we must forget death. Solomon dedicates the rest of this chapter to the idea that all men will die. And Solomon would not find comfort in the bumper sticker I saw years ago, he who dies with the most toys wins. For Solomon to live on this earth with no other purpose than to amass all you can is pointless. And he comes to a conclusion which harbors at the very roots of every man and woman. You cannot take it with you. Verse 15. Then I said to myself, as is the fate of the fool, it will also befall me. Why then have I been extremely wise? So I said to myself, this too is vanity. It sounds fatalistic, and in fact it is, and we need to know Solomon's revelation is fatalistic because it is looking no further than man's 70 to 80 years upon this earth. If there is nothing other than this earth, there is ultimately no difference between the fool and the wise man. There is no difference between the poor and the rich. There is no difference between the successful and the slacker. There is no difference because all will eventually pass, leaving everything behind. And under those conditions, it's of no wonder that Solomon finds no joy in his dreams of accomplishment. He realizes those accomplishments will be forfeit at the end of his days, and in considering all that Solomon has done, he is writing from the perspective of one who has a lot fewer days left than he has days behind him. But Solomon gives us hope to forget death. To forget death, we need only to live. Verse 24. There's nothing better for a man than to eat and drink and tell himself that his labor is good. This also I have seen that it is from the hand of God. You know, we're all familiar with the curse of Adam as he was cast from Eden. The ground would yield its thorns and thistles. He would work by the sweat of his brow. He would eventually pass back into the earth from which he came. But that's the end of God's curse. You know, God does not stand on our shoulder every day and mention to us, you only have 65 years left. Oh, you only have 50 years left. Oh, you only have 25 years left. Hey, you only got 10 years left. Hey, you only have 10 months or 10 hours. We're not to dwell on that which is coming and inevitable, but on that which we are doing from day to day. And that's because that's all the promise we have on this earth. If the extent of our existence is here, we simply need to make the most of it. Solomon has already reminded us of a grievous task which befalls man. And now he reminds us of the one joy which might be man's upon this earth. Work and enjoy what that work affords. But we need to be careful again. Solomon is not talking about gluttony or selfishness or wantonness. He is simply reminding us to make the most of each day, its opportunities, and its particular blessings. And Paul writes the same lesson to Timothy. Since we entered the world penniless and we leave it penniless, if we have bread on the table and shoes on our feet, that's enough. And we can hope because to forget death is the mark of true wisdom. You know, a big part of forgetting death is the ability to forego the dreams which man was not meant to have. At the close of this section in chapter 3, Solomon will add, he has made everything appropriate in his time. He has also set eternity in their hearts, yet so that man will not find out the work which God has done from the beginning to the end. What makes a wise man wise is his ability to appreciate what he has on this earth, no matter how meager. And to be honest, that is not always the easiest of lessons for us to grasp. You know, in the first Harry Potter book, Harry finds the Mirror of Erised, and it's a mirror which does not show merely our reflection, but the deeper, most desperate desire of our heart. It offers the images of our dreams. But Harry is reminded it does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live. And that's Solomon's lesson to us. Our dreams do not need to be the grandiose, the marvelous, or the spectacular. Our best dreams are the ones we actually live. Verse 25, who can eat and who can have enjoyment without him? And that's the real dream, the wise dream, to live with our Creator's blessing. Solomon might have applied the lessons from his own forefathers, but of course, he didn't. And that's the grievous task. All men must answer the tough questions for themselves. So where can my dreams take me? My dreams can take me to an attitude of thanks to my God, my Creator, and my life. Do, 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 do.